Hey guys, Ryan here at Signature Edits, and thank you so much for purchasing the Genesis Lightroom Collection, Lightroom Presets, and Workflow System. So inside of this collection, you're going to get access to a bunch of presets and brushes and export presets, a whole bunch of good stuff. But first, I want to actually show you exactly what you can do to get the very most out of them. Because that's what most preset packs kind of fall short on, is the fact that they give you the presets, they'll maybe give you a quick PDF to install them, but they don't necessarily show you how to use them. The issue with that, obviously, is you can look at the demo photos and they look amazing, and then you install them into Lightroom and you apply the presets and you just find that they look gross and they're not working properly and you don't know why. Well, that might be because there's just a few simple things that you need to know to get the very most out of them. Okay, so we're going to do that in this video and walk through it with you. So by now you have access to your user dashboard, shop.signatureedits.com, and that's where you can grab all of the courses and downloads and purchases you've made on the site. So inside of the Genesis collection, you'll find all of these different downloads. The develop presets are right here, these filters, the one-click presets that you purchased. Now if we go one down, the adjustment brush presets are these guys right over here. So if you're doing a adjustment brush or a radial filter or a graduated filter, up here in the effects tab, you have access to all of these. And once they're installed, you'll have different presets with all sorts of different settings, whether you need them for enhancing your photos, retouching, some special effects, all that good stuff. Further down, we have our export presets. So when we actually want to export our finished edited photos, you'll have some export presets that are optimized for print, web, Facebook, Instagram, that sort of thing. And then we have practice images, so you can actually follow along with me in this tutorial, which is really powerful because you can actually follow along with me step by step until you've mastered using these presets. Now lastly, we have a bonus Lightroom mobile version of these presets if you want to use them on your phone. And then we've got the XMP version if you're using a version of Lightroom that requires it, as well as a PDF link with some different video tutorials showing you how to use these presets in a setting where you're doing batch editing. So we've got one hour-and-a-half long tutorial on editing an entire wedding in an hour and a half, and then another one on editing an entire engagement shoot. And that will just show you how you can use these presets for really fast, effective workflows. So without further ado, you're going to want to download all of these that you need. For now, I'm going to download the practice images and the develop presets and the adjustment brush presets. So I've already done that to save some time. And to install presets in Lightroom, it depends what version of Lightroom you have, and depending when you watch this video, Adobe is always changing their programs in the way that they work, and so you might find that the install process has changed a little bit for you. So basically what you're going to want to do, if you're on my version of Lightroom, is hit this plus button and go import presets, navigate to where you've downloaded those presets, and then add them from there. Now to add your adjustment brushes, you're going to go up to Lightroom, Preferences, and Show Other Lightroom Presets. And the adjustment brush presets are going to go down here where it says Local Adjustment Presets. You'll just grab the folder. The entire folder, once you uncompress it, should say Signature Edits Local Adjustments. You drag that right in here. Then you close Lightroom and reopen it, and these presets should show up. Now, if you want to go the old school route of installing your presets, or you find that this plus icon isn't there that I showed you, this plus icon, you do the same thing with your develop presets by going to Lightroom, Preferences, Show Lightroom Develop Presets, and then you're going to drag the entire folder of develop presets over here. So you can see we've got Signature Edits Genesis. And then right now mine are all XMP because I'm on a most recent version of Lightroom. However, if you have .lr template files, that's fine. You put them in the same spot. Okay? So once you've got that done, and if you don't have this working the same way as me, it's a different version of Lightroom, remember, you can just go to YouTube, type in your version of Lightroom, and then preset installation tutorial. I'm sure something will come up that will help you through the process. Once that's done, we're going to start a new Lightroom catalog and import it with our practice images. So I'm going to go up here, and we'll just call it Ryan's Practice Catalog. This is just to make sure that we have everything separate and organized, and I totally misspelled catalog, so we'll just call it Ryan's Practice Cat, because who doesn't like cats? And we'll call it Ryan's Cat. Perfect. Going to create that. Lightroom is going to restart really quick. And then from there we can go to Finder, wherever it is that we have downloaded our practice photos. So I have them here in this catalog. So to open it up, you'll just find that zip folder and you will double click. It'll expand. If you're on a Windows, it might be slightly different. You might need to right click and go uncompress. Then we will open up this folder, select all these images and drag them into our library module. Make sure you're in the library module or that won't work. And from there, you can see these are all checked. Perfect. We'll just import. We don't need to apply any settings on import because we're going to go through those together. Awesome. So we're going to just disable address lookup because we don't need that. And from here, we'll head over to the develop module and we are ready to get started on these photos. All right. So starting off on this one over here. on our left, we have all of our developed presets. Now you can click these and just see. Sometimes you'll find it really is a one-click edit and it just works. You'll see on this particular photo though, the results aren't that great, and that's because there are a few different things that we need to dial in on the right here to make sure we get the best possible results from our presets. So the first thing is going to be white balance. For every photo, the number one thing you can do to make sure your edit looks as good as possible and your preset works as well as possible is just make sure you dial in the white balance appropriately. So what we're going to do is set this to auto and see what Lightroom does. Now you can see it's warmed it up quite a bit, added some magenta to the photo. I normally find that Lightroom does a better job on auto than my camera does if I keep my white balance as shot. Now another thing we can do instead, if this doesn't do the trick, is grab this eyedropper, find somewhere white in the photo, so say her dress down here, and then Lightroom will base its white balance off of that particular point. So you can see that it's cooled it down just a little bit. So that will go a long way to getting your presets to have better results. You can still see though that these presets are looking pretty extreme, a little bit too much. So the next thing that we would work on is our exposure. So we'll want to dial that in so it's not too bright or too dark. So I'm going to take it a little bit down, just like that, and then see how my presets are looking. Maybe a little bit closer, but still too extreme. Now this is the last step of the process. You'll see that right now I have no contrast, and when I apply these presets, the contrast generally is still around 0. Now we've done that intentionally. A few of these photos have -30, but we've left lots of room to adjust the contrast down because we realize that for certain photos you're going to find that it needs more or less contrast. So that's the last thing that we'll dial in is the contrast, and you can do that either by just actually editing the contrast here, or by taking your whites down. So in this case, you can see how bright the rest of the photo is, and your blacks up a little bit, and just get it exactly where you like it. You can see that this is still looking a little bit warm for my taste, so I'm just going to drag the white balance, and you can see what an extreme difference that makes. Just a little bit can totally change the look of the photo. So somewhere around there with this particular preset looks pretty good. Or if I were to use the Signature Edits 1, probably somewhere right around there, maybe a little bit less white. Perfect. So you can see what a big difference that makes if I were to reset the contrast, set the white balance as shot, and put my white balance, my exposure rather, back where it was. What a big difference that makes. Okay, so moving on into this landscape photo, let me show how I would edit it and explain what's really going on in all of these developed presets and what we have for options. So on your left here, we have 4 different looks included with this pack. Signature Edits 1, 2, 3, and 4, as well as a black and white look. Now inside each of these, we have these little plus icons, and those plus icons are basically taking what's going on in the colors and exaggerating the effect. So primarily that's going to be dealing with your yellows and your greens. So if I open up this HSL panel, you'll see that if I take Signature Edits 1, go to my saturation, then go with the plus, and then plus plus, it's really taking the saturation down in the yellows and the greens, and that's exaggerating the effect of the preset. So that's what's mainly happening there. Now the night version is more or less keeping the colors consistent, but what it's really doing is it's going down into the effects panel, rather the detail, and the noise reduction. It's adding a little bit of noise reduction because it's assuming you're taking it at a higher ISO. And so it's going to do that as well as desaturate some of the colors that at night tend to get a little bit out of control. So you'll see the differences in the reds and the oranges between Signature Edits 1 and night. So you can try that out. So we've got these 4 variations of each look, and then we have our black and white looks as well. And that's essentially the same, only it's how strong the kind of filmic effect is determined by these pluses. It's going to kind of raise the grain and the amount of fade in the photo. And then we have our denoise one for nighttime. And that's really as simple as it is. Now, which preset should you go with? It really depends on the look that you're going for this overall shoot. In general, if I'm editing an entire shoot, which most of the time I am, if it's an engagement or a wedding, I'll go through and I'll find one look and I'll apply that same preset to the entire set of images. And that just gives me a consistent, cohesive look across all of my photos. So I go through here. I'd find one that I liked. I generally start probably with Signature Edits 1. It's more of a kind of true to color preset, if you like, keeps things pretty natural. I'd adjust my exposure and make sure my white balance is where I like it. You can see what a wild difference that makes in the mood and vibe of the photo just by changing that little setting. That'll take my contrast down maybe a little bit, somewhere around there. And then in this photo, I'm going to remove these 2 tourists from the photo because they're a little bit distracting. They're not really adding to the composition. So I'll do that with my spot removal tool. I'll grab it. I'll click once on here. I've got my size and feather set appropriately. you can see that what's happened is the spot removal tool has guessed, okay, I'll replace it with this particular spot on the photo, but I don't want that because it's added this random pole into the area. So I'm going to go on this side instead. Just drag it so it lines up there. Perfect. Just like that, that couple is gone and my photo is one step closer to being complete. Now if I wanted to, I could also remove this pole and this house, maybe even this power line, but I think that's okay for now. What I am going to do is go into my adjustment brushes and make a few quick changes. The first thing I'm going to do is go to my radial filter. I'm going to just add a little bit of pop to this house right here by making it slightly brighter than the rest of the image. To do this, I'm going to take the exposure and turn it slightly up, and my contrast and turn it slightly down, and then we're just going to click and drag. And right now, this mask, you can see this pink area outside. You can see that by pressing O. That means that what's happening, the red area is being affected. Now if I hit the quote key, the apostrophe, that's going to invert this mask. So now what the effect is happening inside of this circle instead of outside the circle. So now it's inside, and I can press O again to see what's actually happening. You can see it's brightening up the house. And I can adjust my overall exposure using the plus and minus keys on my keyboard. You can see it's just adding a little bit of extra pop to that house. Here's before, here's after. So my eye is naturally drawn towards it. I can make that maybe a little bit more subtle by slightly lowering the exposure. And then I'm going to add maybe a little bit of sharpness. And then bring the exposure down very slightly on the whole image. Something like that. Okay, now that I've gone from here to here, I'm going to try and make this sky pop a little bit more. And to do that, I'm going to go to my adjustment brushes. And from here, I can go to my effects panel and choose from my effects that I just added into my Lightroom catalog. So, because I want some special effects, I'm going to look and see what we have in here. So we have a save blown out sky. We have a water sky pop. Let's go with the cloud enhancer. I'm going to take this brush. I've got my flow set all the way up. Feather set to 73, size to 31, but you can really play with this. It doesn't matter so much. We're just doing a general coat on top of here. And you can see that we're just adding a little bit of highlight to the sky. And we'll take the saturation up very slightly. Our whites up very slightly. There we go, something like that. Now we want to keep this effect subtle, so we can't see where the effect starts and where it ends. So if I delete this, you'll see before and after. Just made that sky pop a little bit more out of the photo. And lastly, let's do one more brush just for fun. I'm going to go down here, add a new brush by selecting New, go to Effects, and this time I'm going to add some texture. I'm going to enhance the texture in this grass by sharpening it a little bit. So you can see that this preset adds some clarity and some sharpness. So we're just going to brush on the grass here like this. Perfect. So here's before, and here's after. Very subtle, but it makes the photo pop that much more. So I'm feeling pretty good about this photo. Here's before, and here's after. That's how I would do a landscape photo with the Genesis pack. Next up, we have this photo, and for some reason it is loading an old preset. And obviously this photo is way overexposed, so we can start by looking at our presets and see how they look, but really it's not the preset's fault here, it's just that the exposure is way too bright. So I'm going to take my exposure and take it way down. Somewhere around there is much more appropriate. Then I'm going to go to my presets and see what I like. And you can see they all look pretty good once the exposure is set. But if I hadn't corrected the exposure and I just left it, I would have assumed that the presets weren't working. So take your exposure, take that down, and just find the preset that you like the most. Personally, I'm loving Signature Edits 3 on this particular photo. Now what I can do if I want to is just bring out the greens a little bit more. Let's go down here. And we'll do add texture, but we'll also add a little bit more saturation. And we'll just paint on a few of the leaves over here. Perfect. Now one last thing, if we wanted, we could add maybe a little bit of a sun flare, pretend that was coming through the greenhouse. Now I don't know how this effect is going to work on this particular image, but it just gives you an opportunity to see how it works. We're going to scroll down here. I've got a radial filter. I'm going to select Sun Flare Subtle. I personally like this one. Click and drag. You can see right now the effect is happening outside the circle. So to switch that, I hit my apostrophe key. That's the quotation mark key. You'll see now it's inside the circle. I'm just going to drag it up in here. And obviously this isn't looking very nice right now, but I can adjust this effect from here. This has just given me a starting point, and from image to image, it's really going to depend. I could try these other sun flares and see how they look. That one's maybe a little closer to where I want to be, or this one. But what I'm going to do is take the saturation down, take my exposure up, and just play around. So you can see how you could maybe add a sun flare in there if you wanted. So here's with, and here's without. Just adds a little bit of interest to the image. So here's our image before editing and after. Okay, this one is looking pretty good. Obviously there's less contrast in this image overall than in this image, which had a lot of contrast to begin with. So for this photo, I'm actually maybe going to need to add a little contrast afterwards. But let's just see how we're looking here. You can see that the presets all look pretty good right out of the gate. I personally really like Signature Edits 3 or 1. So we'll go with 1 for now. I'll take my contrast, turn that up very slightly. And now if you want to, you can add a little bit of dehaze on her hair, because you can see that we had some fog going on in the background here, and it's cutting out the detail from her hair. So I can go down here. We'll go to the retouching brush, grab the hair and lashes. We'll just paint on her hair. You can see how it really sharpens it up. Makes it pop a little bit more. Do it on his as well. And then I'm going to go to a new brush. And this time I'm going to go to the Detail Enhance or Add Texture. Perfect. And I'm going to add some texture on her dress because I really want to bring out all that beautiful detail in the fabric. And the same with his. And it's these little things that just subtly add a little bit extra to your images. And I'm going to do one more brush. This one's going to be subtle. I'll take my flow down. I'm going to reset my brush, hold Alt, and then hit the reset button while you're holding it. And add a little bit of dehaze, a little bit of sharpening. And I'm just going to paint it onto this part of the image. Great, and you know what? His face is looking a little soft too, so I'll add some there. Perfect. So that's actually looking pretty good to me, but if I wanted to, I could do one more thing just by adding some attention to them, simply by lowering my contrast, raising my exposure, and we'll do a nice little brush right here. Invert it so that they're brighter, and then darken the image. So you can see here's before we added that, and after. It really just puts a spotlight on them, and makes the background a little bit more background. Leads your eyes. So here's before edits, and here's after. Okay, this one is looking pretty sweet right off the bat, and you can see that really if you have your exposure looking good, if your white balance is already set well in camera, oftentimes you'll actually find you don't need to do much more than just select a preset if you don't want to. So I'm just going to find a preset I like the looks of. Let's say this one. And then if I want to, again, I could go through here, maybe go to my Add Texture, and just bring out the texture in these trees because it's pretty cool. Bring my flow back up. There's no point in adding a ton of sharpening to the entire image when I only really need to enhance a couple parts. And we'll paint on his clothing a little bit and these boards to make them pop. Great. Now lastly, I'm just going to add a little bit of pop, again, you guessed it, to the center of the photo, the subject, which is our van. We'll lower the contrast, raise the exposure, and invert it by hitting the apostrophe key. Now that's pretty extreme, so we'll take that right down, like that, and then darken the image. And we can experiment with our feather to see what we like better. Say there. Here's before, and here's after. Okay, now we've got this castle image, and again, you'll see it's pretty simple, pretty one-click edits. I personally, for photos with a lot of green, prefer Signature Edits 1 because it tends to leave the greens if the greens are already nice. However, if you find that you've got greens that are more of a yellowish, kind of nasty looking color, that's where these pluses can look really good because you're desaturating those greens and taking them to a different place. But in this case, I like Signature Edits 1. We're going to bring out a little texture in this stone. You can hit O if you like, and that'll let you see what you're painting. And then paint even on the castle to bring out some of that texture. Press O again to get rid of that. So here's before that brush and after. And you can see that it's not a whole lot that's going on in this brush. It's not some magic recipe, but at the same time, it sure saves a lot of time than if I had gone in manually and I'd made this brush by going contrast and a little bit of highlights, bring the shadows down, little clarity, little sharpness. And if you do that every time, it winds up taking way longer than if you simply have the brush saved and you go ahead. There it is, done. And it's consistent every single time. Now, if you find that these brushes are too much for you, you're not really liking that specific setting, or you're always tweaking something, let's say I'm always taking the saturation and turning it off, you can simply go up to this brush, go down to the very bottom and click Save Current Settings as New Preset, or just update that new texture brush as your preferred setting. It's really as simple as that. The same goes for these presets. If you find that overall Signature Edits 1 is way too contrasty for you, it's really as simple as you can go to your Develop module, take the contrast where you consistently find you're grabbing it anyways, right-click on this preset, and go Update with Current Settings. Then every time you adjust this preset or apply the preset, it will already have those changes made. So you can customize these presets to fit you perfectly. Now for me, I think that photo is actually good enough. It's perfect for what I want. I'm going to, again, do my little trick here, bring the contrast down, exposure up very slightly, invert the mask, darken the rest of the image. You can see, here's the difference. Before, after. Just brightens it up a little bit. Now that's looking a little extreme to me, so what I'm going to do is go back here, take my feather up, and just dial this back a little bit, so maybe 0.2. So here's before our edit and after. All right, this one we're going to adjust our photo so it's looking straight up and down. We're going to do that by hitting R, and then we can just grab the corner, adjust it so that it is level. And from here we can apply our presets. You can see that right now the photo is pretty overexposed, and so if you don't like that look, just take the exposure down using the plus or minus keys or dragging your exposure slider. Once you got it where you like it, it's really a one-click preset with this particular one. Great, that's looking pretty darn good. So we'll keep on going, and again, this photo of the boat, pretty much one-click preset here. It doesn't matter which one we use, they're all just a matter of taste. Which do you like the best? Choose that one, and we're good to go. Next, we have this photo of me, and you can see that we've got some interesting pinkishness going up in the whites here. And then the sky is pretty blown out. So I'll show you how I'd approach it. The first thing I do is I would take my exposure and take it down. Then I'm going to find the preset that I like the looks of the most. So depending what kind of vibe I'm going for, let's say this one. Now, obviously, this area of the photo is way underexposed, and this area is way overexposed. The first thing I do is check and see, do I still have my sky, or did I blow it out? In fact, I did keep it. It's not blown out. I can still get it back. So what I'm going to do is kind of find a happy middle ground here. Then we're going to use a little adjustment brush trick that I actually have a full YouTube tutorial on if you want to check it out later. I'm going to zoom way out, take my adjustment brush, reset it for now, and we're just going to go to the auto mask section, turn my flow up all the way, feather all the way down, make my size of the brush nice and big so it covers the entire image, and click once on the area that I want to brush out. So I'll click on the sky here, any point, and press O so I can see what's going on. So you can see it's brushed out all of the areas of similar brightness and color, which in this case is our entire sky, but it's left most of the rest of the image without brushing on it. So then I can go ahead, press O again, and take my exposure down, just like that. I masked out that sky in Lightroom, and if you want to add blue to sky, quick trick here, you can just grab your temperature and drag it down. You can see how much more blue we now have in the sky. Isn't that great? Easy way to add saturation. So we don't want to take this too far or it will be way too painfully obvious, but I'm just going to dial it in here as much as I can, say somewhere like that. So here's before and here's after. Big difference already. Now I'm going to go up to my zoom tool and zoom back out, and we're going to try the same thing, but we'll do it with the shadows this time. So I'll go to New. We're going to click once on the shadows, press O to see how it worked, and it did a pretty decent job of masking everything out. We'll zoom back in. It didn't really mask out me very well, so I'll click again here on me, and again on my black clothes, on this little window perch. And wherever I'm clicking is the exact center of the brush. So you see the cross in the middle of this brush, that's the part that I'm clicking and sampling from. Click on the steps. I'm basically just going to click on different areas of the image that are not being masked out until it's all covered. Great. That is looking pretty darn close. So now I can press O again and do the same thing, but instead of just taking the exposure up, which might look a little bit weird, obviously, you can see that we've also masked out some of the palm trees shadows as well, so I want to erase those. So I'm going to hold Alt to hit my eraser brush. I'm going to take my flow and not have it all the way up. Feather can go up, size up a little bit, and just brush on these palm trees. I don't need to get rid of the entire effect, but just a lot of it. Great. So now what I'm going to do is take my whites. I'm going to enhance the whites in the image. That'll work way better than if I just grabbed the exposure and took everything, whites and shadows, up. That looks unnatural, but if I just take the whites up, I'm adding contrast to the image and it looks a little bit more natural. Okay, something like that. Perfect. And now maybe that might be a little bit too far for you. You're just going to have to find the area that you think is kind of the most subtle. We don't want it to look way too overdone that it's obvious that it's been affected, but we do want to do what we can to make this image better. You can see some areas of this mask haven't really worked perfectly. So I'm just going to get those with my auto mask on. If this isn't working for you, make sure you do have this little box checked. If auto mask isn't on, it won't do the same thing. And if I turn it off, then I can just mask like normal by painting. You can see the auto mask, it's a great little trick, but it's not perfect, and it's not going to give you absolutely perfect, don't have to worry about it results, but it does a wild amount of change if you use it. So here's before and after. That's obviously pretty extreme. I probably wouldn't use this as my final edit. Take my contrast up a little bit, take my blacks down. So what I'm doing is trying to make the lighting more natural. We know that there's going to be darker areas of this image and some dark shadows. So we're not going to try and make the shadows, as bright as the sun because that would just look weird. So we'll take them down. Great. Somewhere around there is pretty okay. Last, I'm going to add a radial mask just on me. We'll do our little contrast trick. A little bit of exposure here. Something like that. And a little bit of sharpness because I'm looking pretty soft in this photo. Maybe a couple points for clarity. Here's before and after. So now this isn't my demonstration of what I believe is a perfect edit. It's really just to give you the idea of, okay, if you have a blown out sky, this is something you can do. If you have shadows that are looking way too dark, that's how you can bring some of them back. Hopefully it's helpful for you. Here is the before of the photo and after. There's before and after. Okay, let's keep going. I'm going to skip maybe a couple of these photos because they're pretty one-touch presets. You can see it's pretty quick and easy. Just find the look that you like and adjust the exposure and the white balance, and you're pretty good to go. So here's before. And then you can really see the effect of the pluses in these presets, how it takes the greens and it takes the saturation out of them. That's a quick trick. If you ever find your photo just isn't looking the way you want, take a look at the yellows and the greens in the HSL panel. Just take the saturation down, and that'll go a long way into improving the look and feel of your photo, just to take the saturation down in the greens. Oftentimes, that's all you need. So we'll keep going here. That's pretty contrasty, so we'll take our contrast down, exposure up, and our skin tones are looking pretty green here, so I'll add some magenta. Better. Alright, so here is how I would suggest starting with a portrait inside of Lightroom with the Signature Edits pack. First, you're going to find the preset you like. With this image, you can see that it looks pretty good no matter which preset I apply, but I'm going to stick with probably Signature Edits 2+. No particular reason, I just like the look with this particular image. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is think about what details I want to enhance. Obviously, we have the sparkles on her face that we'll want to bring out. Maybe make her eyes pop a little bit, bring up some slight sharpening on her eyelashes, her eyebrows, her hair, any details we really want to bring out in the image, as well as imperfections that we might want to minimize. So, for example, if she had some acne or some scars or some wrinkles going on, we could work on those. So, I could start and maybe minimize the wrinkles underneath her eyelid. On this one side, I see some wrinkles. Let's get started together. And then lastly, I'm going to brighten up her face because I can see that her chest here seems to be brighter than her face, and we'll bring some attention to her face just by brightening that whole area up. Okay, let's get started. First, I'm going to zoom in here 1:1. And we'll start by bringing out the texture in these sparkles. To do that, I'll add a texture brush, navigate over here, and I'm only going to try and bring texture out in the stuff that is in focus, not the areas that are out of focus in the image. So we're just going to draw on here. You can see it's just very subtly making those pop a little bit more. You can press O if you want to see exactly where you're painting. Just like that. So press O again to get rid of that. Here's before, and here's after. Very subtle. If you want to take it a step further, you can. You can take your sharpening all the way up, but I personally like it the way it is. Keep it subtle. Next, I'm going to work on her eyes and make them pop a little bit. We'll do that by adding a new layer. Then we're going to go down here to the retouching section and grab the iris enhancer. The iris is this colored area inside her eye. So I'll just paint on there. Press O so I can see exactly where I'm painting. Perfect. Press O again. Here's before and after. Just makes the eyes pop a little bit more. One more brush, the eye brightener this time. And I'm going to draw on the whites of her eyes. You can see that right now, they're actually not really white at all. They're more blue. So I'm going to take the saturation down in the whites of her eyes. Very slightly. So you can see if I took it all out, then it just looks weird, but maybe down by 30. Here's before, and here's after. That might be a little extreme, so I'll back off. Always better to err on the side of caution when it comes to retouching. You can see that now her eyes are popping, but there may be a little bit almost too much here. So I'll take that and I'll dial it back. There we go. So here's before and here's after. You can see it's really come a long way. I'm going to enhance her eyebrows and her lips just a little bit. Go down here, new brush. This time we'll go with hair and lashes. So we'll just paint on her eyelashes just a little bit. Perfect. If you can't see what's going on, press O. And on both eyebrows. Okay. Looking good. That's before and after. You can see the difference. Very subtle, but makes her eyebrows that much thicker and more dynamic. And one more onto her lips. Go down here. Lip enhancer. See how that looks? You'll find not all these brushes always work perfectly all the time. For example, the lips, for me, that's just way too much. So I'm going to take the saturation all the way down. Don't need to add any. Just make this brush a little subtler. Okay, so that is looking pretty darn good. I could lastly just work on these tiny little wrinkles under her eyes. I'm going to go new brush, go over here to the skin softener, and paint right in here. And so this is going to just very subtly declarify the skin in this area so that the wrinkles aren't quite as pronounced. I could take it a step further if I want, just by lowering the saturation, or the sharpness rather. Take the contrast down a little bit. You can see here's before and after. Okay. That is looking really good to me. The last thing that I'm going to do, other than maybe enhancing, I know I keep saying the last thing and then I notice something else. Other than enhancing her hair a little bit with the Add Texture brush, I'm going to grab a radial filter now. We're going to do our trademark effect here, lower the contrast, raise the exposure just a little bit, and then do that over her face. Invert. So you can see her face is now quite a bit brighter. We'll maybe take that up even more. And then lower the exposure of the image with the minus key. Somewhere around there. So you can see here is before, and here's after. So this really adds some attention to her face, rather than the brightest portion of the image previously being down here. So really your eyes are generally attracted to what's bright in the image, so we want the brightest area, hopefully, to be where we want people to look. Okay, so that portrait is looking pretty good. A couple more photos for you. You can see the presets look pretty great. Just adjust your exposure using the plus and minus keys. Dial in your contrast. Maybe adjust your crop if it's crooked. And next. This photo looks pretty good no matter which preset I put on here, but I'm just going to go and take my contrast up a little bit and enhance. You see the sun flare, the sunset happening here. I'm going to really enhance that by going down to my radial filter, over here to my sun flare subtle brush, click, drag, invert that with the apostrophe key. And here's a great example of using that sun flare. You can see the color actually makes sense in this photo, whereas it didn't in the greenhouse. So again, here's before and here's after. Now, if you want to, you can dial that back, depending on your preference, right? You might decide you like photos with a little bit less contrast, or a little bit darker. It's totally up to you. Do just a couple more here so you can see I can adjust my presets. These all look pretty not so good, but remember we have our big three things we need to change: the white balance, the exposure, and the contrast. So in this case, I think it's just a matter of adding some contrast to this image and lowering the exposure. You can see two little changes, and that edit looks way better than it did at first. Here's before, there's after. Okay, this one, we'll go through. Everything looks pretty good out of the gate. Maybe lower the exposure a little bit. Grab my radial filter. And this time we're going to use this effects brush, the Moody Dehaze Darken. So where are you hiding? Brooding Dehaze Darken. I really like this one for certain photos with the right vibe. You can see what it's doing on the outside of my image when I press the apostrophe key. Here's after and before. Oh, other way around. Before and after. You understand. Here's before, here's after. Just adds a little bit of attention to the center of the image here. Great. This one, again, you can see how the white balance is very blue. So no matter what preset I add, it's going to stay blue until I adjust that. So I can warm that up either by going to auto white balance, or if Lightroom doesn't catch it, I can just warm it up myself. I think that's a lot more natural. Now you can see the edit afterwards. Just looks a lot better. And because our eyes are normally going to go to the brightest portion of the image, I'm going to make sure to just brighten the center of this image here. Great. Now if I wanted to, I've got the Brooding Dehaze Darken brush on here. I could just go with a simple contrast brush and do our contrast and exposure bump. And then darken things down. So you can see here's before and after. Big difference. We'll just adjust our crop so things are looking more straight. Before, after. All right. We are done going through these photos. Now, if you want to see even more editing with the Genesis preset pack, different workflows for weddings and engagements, make sure to check out the PDF and the links in there. And you can head to our YouTube channel. Just go over to YouTube and type in Signature Edits, and you'll be able to find us. And we have all sorts of Lightroom tutorials on here, both using our presets and just mastering the basics in Lightroom, whether that's tone curve or different workflow techniques, sharpening, understanding the HSL panel, all of this stuff. We cover it in depth, so make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment if you have any questions. We'd be happy to help you however we can. That's it for now. Thank you so much for purchasing the Genesis preset pack. I wish you the very best in your editing, in your business, in your photography, and I look forward to hearing from you. Take care.